Every day, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, our lives are filled with routines. Think about your morning. You wake up, maybe check your phone, brush your teeth, drink tea or coffee, and get ready for the day. Most of these things you don't even decide consciously. They just happen. That's the power of habit. Charles Duhigg begins his book, The Power of Habit, by showing us something fascinating. We are creatures of habit far more than we realize. Studies in neuroscience reveal that nearly 40 to 50% of what we do every single day is not conscious decision-making, but habits. Habits save our brain energy. Instead of making decisions about brushing teeth or tying shoelaces every day, our brain automates these actions so we can focus on more complex problems. Imagine how exhausting life would be if you had to think carefully about every single step of walking, eating, or driving. Habits are shortcuts that help us live efficiently. But here's the catch. Habits don't just control small things. They also control big things. Our health, productivity, relationships, success at work, and even social movements. Some habits uplift us, while others quietly drag us down. Charles Duhigg argues that once we understand how habits work, we gain the power to reshape them. That's the central promise of this book. Habits are not destiny. They can be changed, replaced, and redesigned. The introduction also gives us powerful real-life examples. Take Eugene Pauly, a man who lost his memory due to illness. He couldn't remember his address, the names of his doctors, or even the faces of neighbors. Yet, he could walk around his block, return home safely, and even cook meals. How was this possible if he couldn't remember anything? The answer is habits. His brain had stored these routines so deeply that memory loss could not erase them. This shows us something extraordinary. Habits live in a different part of the brain than memory. Even when memory is gone, habits remain. So, the big question is, how do habits actually work inside the brain? What makes them so strong? And can we take control of them? And this takes us directly into Chapter 1, where Charles Duhigg introduces the concept of the habit loop, the basic formula that explains how every habit is formed and how it can be changed. Chapter 1. The Habit Loop. How Habits Work. In the introduction, we saw how habits live deep inside our brain, shaping our daily life often without us even noticing. But the question is, what exactly makes a habit? How does the brain decide to create one? Charles Duhigg answers this with one of the most important discoveries in neuroscience. Every habit follows the same pattern, called the habit loop. This loop has 3 parts. Cue, a signal that tells your brain, it's time for this habit. Routine, the actual behavior or action. Reward, the benefit or pleasure your brain receives. Over time, this loop becomes automatic. Let's explore it with some stories. The case of Eugene Pauly. Remember Eugene from the introduction? The man who lost his memory, but still managed to live normally in many ways. Scientists studied his brain and discovered that while his memory center was damaged, another part of his brain, the basal ganglia, was still active. The basal ganglia is the control room for habits. It doesn't care about remembering names or facts. It cares about storing routines. For Eugene, walking around his neighborhood, opening the kitchen cabinets, or making breakfast had become habits long before his memory loss. That's why he could still do them. This shows us habits are not choices we make every day. They are stored patterns that our brain runs automatically. The cookie experiment. Duhigg also shares a personal story. He developed a habit of eating a cookie every afternoon at work. At first, he thought he was simply hungry. But when he studied his own routine carefully, he realized something interesting. Cue. Around 3:30 p.m., he felt restless and bored. Routine. He walked to the cafeteria, bought a cookie, and chatted with colleagues. Reward. Yes, the cookie tasted good, but the real reward was the social interaction, the small break in the workday. Once he recognized the loop, he replaced the routine. Instead of buying a cookie, he simply walked to a friend's desk and talked for 10 minutes. The craving was satisfied, but the unhealthy habit was gone. This is the power of the habit loop. Once you spot the cue and reward, you can change the routine. Why habits feel automatic. Habits form because the brain is always looking for ways to save effort. When you repeat an action enough times, your brain stops thinking and starts running the loop automatically. That's why you can drive home without remembering the journey, or tie your shoelaces without paying attention. The scary part? Once a habit is formed, the brain doesn't forget it. That's why old habits, like smoking or overeating, feel so hard to quit. They're still sitting in your brain, waiting for the cue. But the hopeful part is this. If you understand the habit loop, you can change the routine and reshape your life. Key lesson of Chapter 1. Every habit, big or small, is built on a cue, routine, reward cycle. Identify the cue. Understand the reward, and you will have the power to change the routine. This simple loop is the foundation of the entire book. And now, with this understanding, Duhigg takes us deeper in Chapter 2. The Craving Brain, where he shows us the secret ingredient that makes habits so sticky, and why some habits are impossible to resist. Chapter 2. The Craving Brain. How to create new habits. In Chapter 1, we learned about the habit loop, cue, routine, reward. But here's the real secret. It's not the reward itself that makes habits powerful. It's the craving for the reward that drives the loop. Without craving, habits don't stick. With craving, even a simple cue can become irresistible. The story of toothpaste. At the beginning of the 1900s, almost no one brushed their teeth in America. Dental hygiene was terrible. So bad that during World War I, many soldiers were rejected from service because of rotten teeth. Then came a product called Pepsodent toothpaste. The company didn't just say, brush to avoid cavities. Instead, they created a sensation. Pepsodent added citric acid and mint oil, which left a cool, tingling feeling in the mouth. That tingle didn't actually clean teeth. It wasn't medically necessary, but it made people crave the feeling. Soon, brushing became a daily habit across the country. The lesson: people didn't crave clean teeth, they craved the fresh tingle. The craving created the habit. Cravings and cues. Cravings are what transform a simple habit loop into something powerful. Think about commercials for soda. They don't just show the drink. They show people smiling, laughing, enjoying life. Your brain starts linking cue, thirst, or seeing a soda ad. Routine, drinking soda. Reward, pleasure, happiness. But the real power comes from the craving. The brain begins to anticipate the reward before it happens. The moment you feel the cue, your brain starts desiring the satisfaction. That's why cravings are so hard to resist. The monkey and the juice experiment. Scientists ran an experiment with monkeys. They trained them to press a lever when a light appeared, and in return, the monkeys got a sip of juice. At first, the monkeys pressed the lever randomly, but soon something changed. As soon as the light appeared, their brains started releasing dopamine, the pleasure chemical, even before the juice came. The monkeys were not just enjoying the juice. They were craving the expectation of juice. When the juice was later removed, the monkeys became upset, frustrated, and angry. Why? Because their brains had been programmed to expect that reward. This is exactly how human cravings work. The brain learns to predict rewards, and this prediction drives our habits. Back to the cookie example. Remember Charles Duhigg's cookie habit? He realized it wasn't just the taste of the cookie he wanted. It was the anticipation of fun and connection with coworkers. His brain craved that little social break. Once he understood the craving, he was able to replace the cookie with a quick chat and still feel satisfied. Key lesson of Chapter 2. Habits are not just about cues and rewards. They are powered by cravings. No craving is equal to no strong habit. Strong craving is equal to habit becomes automatic. This means that if you want to create a new habit, you must find a way to build craving into it. Example. If you want to exercise, make yourself crave the endorphin rush, the music you play, or the sense of pride afterward. And now, the book takes us to a very important question. If habits are powered by cravings and hard to erase, how do we actually change bad habits? That's where Chapter 3, the golden rule of habit change comes in. It reveals the formula that has helped alcoholics, athletes, and companies transform destructive patterns into positive ones. Chapter 3: The Golden Rule of Habit Change. Why transformation occurs. By now, we know that habits are built through the habit loop: cue, routine, reward, and powered by craving. But here comes the big challenge. If habits are so deeply wired in the brain, can they ever be changed? The answer, Charles Duhigg says, is yes. But here's the truth. Habits never really disappear. Once they are formed, they remain in the brain, waiting to be triggered. That's why people who quit smoking years ago might suddenly feel the urge when they see an old friend light a cigarette. So, if you can't erase a habit, how do you change it? The solution is what Duhigg calls the golden rule of habit change. Keep the cue, keep the reward, but change the routine. The story of Alcoholics Anonymous, AA. One of the best examples of this rule comes from Alcoholics Anonymous, the global support group for people struggling with drinking. Alcoholics don't just drink for the taste of alcohol. Usually there's a cue, like stress, loneliness, or boredom. The routine is drinking. The reward is the feeling of escape, relief, or comfort. AA doesn't try to erase these cues and rewards. Instead, it replaces the routine. Instead of drinking when they feel stressed, members attend meetings, pray, or call a sponsor. The stress, cue, is still there, and the relief, reward, is still achieved. But through a healthier routine. This is why AA has worked for millions. It doesn't fight against the habit loop, it rewires it. Tony Dungy and the NFL. Another example comes from American football coach Tony Dungy. He turned one of the weakest teams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, into champions by focusing on habits. Dungy believed players didn't have time to think during fast games, so he trained them to react automatically, to replace old routines with new ones. Instead of hesitating, players learned to follow new reflexive moves when they saw certain cues. Within a few years, the team transformed, all because their routines were changed, while the cues, opposing team movements, and rewards, winning, stayed the same. Angie Bachman, The Gambling Habit. Not all stories end positively. Duhigg shares the story of Angie Bachman, a woman who developed a gambling addiction. Her cue was boredom and loneliness, her routine was going to the casino, and her reward was excitement and escape. Even when she realized the damage, she struggled to stop because the craving for that reward was so strong. Angie's story is a reminder. If we don't take control of habits, they can take control of us. The golden rule in action. So here's the formula again. Identify the cue. Keep the reward. Change the routine. Example. If your habit is eating junk food at night, don't fight the craving directly. Instead, keep the cue, boredom, hunger. Keep the reward, satisfaction, comfort. But change the routine. Eat a healthier snack, drink tea, or take a walk. Key lesson of Chapter 3. Habits cannot be erased, but they can be rewired. By changing the routine while keeping the same cue and reward, transformation is possible. This principle works for individuals, teams, and even organizations. And with this, we move into part 2 of the book, The Habits of Successful Organizations. Here, Duhigg shifts focus from individuals to companies, showing how businesses and leaders use habits to drive massive change. The journey begins with Chapter 4, Keystone Habits, or The Ballad of Paul O'Neill, where we learn how one small change can spark a chain reaction that transforms an entire company. Chapter 4, Keystone Habits, or The Ballad of Paul O'Neill. Which habits matter most? Up to now, we've seen how habits shape individuals, but habits are just as powerful inside organizations. Companies, just like people, develop patterns of behavior, ways of doing things automatically. Some of these habits drive success, while others cause failure. Charles Duhigg introduces us to the idea of keystone habits. Keystone habits are special habits that trigger a chain reaction, influencing many other behaviors. Change one keystone habit, and the whole system begins to shift. The story of Paul O'Neill at Alcoa. In 1987, Paul O'Neill became the CEO of Alcoa, one of the world's biggest aluminum companies. Investors expected him to talk about profits, expansion, or new technology. But his first speech shocked everyone. He said, "I want to talk to you about worker safety." At the time, Alcoa had many injuries in its factories. But safety? Investors thought he was crazy. What about profits? What about growth? But O'Neill was brilliant. By focusing on safety, he was targeting a keystone habit. Here's why. To improve safety, managers and workers had to communicate better. Systems had to be redesigned for efficiency. Everyone, from top leaders to factory workers, had to take responsibility. In other words, safety was not just about preventing injuries. It was about changing the culture of the company. And it worked. Within a few years, accident rates dropped dramatically. Productivity improved. Costs went down. Profits soared. Alcoa became one of the most successful companies in the industry. All because of a single keystone habit: safety. Keystone habits in personal life. Keystone habits don't just exist in companies, they exist in our personal lives too. Example: exercise. When people start exercising regularly, research shows they often begin eating healthier, sleeping better, and being more productive at work. Exercise is a keystone habit. It sparks other positive changes. Example: family dinners. Studies show that families who eat dinner together regularly often see kids doing better in school, having better emotional health, and avoiding risky behaviors. The simple habit of eating together becomes a keystone that strengthens many areas of life. Why keystone habits matter. The power of keystone habits comes from this. They create small wins that build confidence. They change how people see themselves, their identity. They spread to other routines naturally. Keystone habits act like dominoes. Push one, and many others start to fall. Key lesson of Chapter 4. Not all habits are equal. Some have the power to reshape entire lives or organizations. These are keystone habits. If you want big change, focus on these first. With this, Charles Duhigg takes us to another powerful idea: how willpower, often seen as a personal trait, can actually be turned into an organizational habit. That's what we'll discover in Chapter 5. Starbucks and the Habit of Success. When willpower becomes automatic. Chapter 5. Starbucks and the Habit of Success. When willpower becomes automatic. In the last chapter, we learned about keystone habits, those powerful routines that trigger chain reactions. Now, Charles Duhigg shows us another life-changing habit: willpower. Research proves something fascinating. Willpower is the single most important habit for success. People with strong willpower tend to do better in school, perform better at work, save more money, and even live healthier lives. But here's the key insight. Willpower is not just a personal trait. It can be trained and turned into a habit. The Starbucks example. Starbucks is one of the most successful coffee companies in the world. But their success is not just about selling coffee. It's about training employees in habits of self-discipline and willpower. Why? Because Starbucks employees often deal with difficult situations: angry customers, stressful shifts, long hours. Losing your temper even once could mean losing a customer forever. So, Starbucks didn't just train employees to make coffee. They trained them to build willpower habits, to stay calm and act professionally even under pressure. The latte method. Starbucks developed something called the latte method for employees. L. Listen to the customer. A. Acknowledge the problem. T. Take action to solve it. T. Thank the customer. E. Explain why the problem happened. This routine gave employees a clear script to follow. When a customer yelled, instead of panicking or reacting emotionally, employees automatically followed the steps. Over time, this became a habit of willpower, staying calm, polite, and effective no matter the situation. Willpower as a muscle. Scientists say willpower works like a muscle. If you use it too much, it gets tired. But if you train it regularly, it becomes stronger. Example: In one experiment, people who started exercising, a form of willpower training, also started managing money better, eating healthier, and working harder. Training willpower in one area spread into other parts of life. Teaching willpower in schools. Some schools experimented with teaching children small willpower habits, like making them complete homework on time or finish long-term projects. The results were impressive. Students not only improved academically, but also became more focused in life. This proves that willpower is not fixed. It can be taught, practiced, and built into daily routines. Why Starbucks succeeded. By making willpower automatic, through clear routines and scripts, Starbucks created a culture where employees could handle stress without breaking down. This habit of discipline became a competitive advantage. Customers didn't just get coffee, they got a consistent, pleasant experience, no matter what. Key lesson of Chapter 5. Willpower is the foundation of success. It can be trained like a muscle. It spreads into other areas of life. The best way to make willpower strong is to turn it into a habit. And with this, Duhigg leads us to the next powerful idea: how leaders can use crises, moments of chaos and pressure, to reshape entire organizations. That's the focus of Chapter 6, the power of a crisis. How leaders create habits through accident and design. Chapter 6, the power of a crisis. How leaders create habits through accident and design. In the last chapter, we learned how Starbucks trained willpower into a habit. Now Charles Duhigg shows us another surprising truth. Crises, moments of chaos, stress, or disaster, can become powerful opportunities for building new habits. Organizations, like people, usually resist change. But in a crisis, routines are shaken. Leaders can use that moment to introduce new, healthier habits that might otherwise be impossible to enforce. The Rhode Island Hospital case. At Rhode Island Hospital, the culture had become dangerous. Doctors had too much authority. Nurses often stayed silent, even when they saw mistakes. Communication was broken. This toxic routine eventually led to tragedy. In 2007, a patient died because of a simple surgical mistake. The crisis was so big, it forced the hospital to confront its bad habits. Leaders redesigned systems. Nurses were encouraged and required to speak up. Safety checklists became mandatory. Team communication was made part of the hospital's culture. The result? Over time, Rhode Island Hospital went from being one of the worst in safety to one of the best. Without the crisis, the change would never have happened. Football and tragedy. Duhigg also describes how crises in sports teams reshaped behavior. A tragedy in one college football team forced leaders to rethink how players were trained, disciplined, and supported. Instead of ignoring problems, they built habits of responsibility and teamwork. Again, it was the crisis that opened the door for change. Crisis as a leadership tool. Leaders throughout history have often used crises, both real and manufactured, to change habits in organizations. Why? Because when everything feels normal, people resist change. But when disaster strikes, people are desperate for solutions. That's the moment when new routines can be introduced and stick. Example: after fires, plane crashes, or product failures, companies often redesign their safety systems and culture. These new habits usually last because they were born during intense pressure. Accident versus design. Crises can happen by accident, like a medical mistake or a financial collapse. But wise leaders also know how to use small crises by design, controlled moments of stress, to push organizations toward better habits. It's like fire drills in schools. By creating small, controlled crises, people build habits of safety that prepare them for real emergencies. Key lesson of Chapter 6. Crises break down old patterns and create openings for new ones. Smart leaders don't waste a crisis. They use it to build stronger, healthier, more effective habits in their organizations. Now that we've seen how organizations can transform through habits of safety, willpower, and crisis, Duhigg takes us into the fascinating world of data and consumer habits. In Chapter 7, How Target Knows What You Want Before You Do, We'll discover how companies track our routines, predict our cravings, and sometimes even control our buying decisions, often without us realizing it. Chapter 7. How Target Knows What You Want. Before you do, when companies predict and manipulate habits. In the last chapter, we saw how crises can reshape organizations. But habits don't only exist in people and companies, they also exist in consumers. And today, big businesses have become masters at studying, predicting, and even manipulating these habits. Charles Duhigg takes us inside one of the most surprising examples: Target, the retail giant. The Target story. Target wanted to increase sales by understanding customers better. They hired a team of statisticians and data analysts to study shopping patterns. What they discovered was astonishing. People's buying habits are surprisingly predictable. If a woman suddenly starts buying unscented lotion, vitamin supplements, and cotton balls, there's a high chance she's pregnant, even if she hasn't told anyone yet. Target used this information to send personalized ads, like baby clothes, diapers, and cribs, to expectant mothers. The shocked father. One famous story shows just how powerful this system was. A man walked into a Target store, angry. He told the manager, "Why are you sending my teenage daughter coupons for baby products? Are you encouraging her to get pregnant?" The manager apologized. But a week later, the father returned, embarrassed. His daughter was indeed pregnant. Target knew before the family did. That's how powerful habit data can be. How companies use habits. Companies know that changing customer habits is hard. So instead, they slip new routines into existing ones. Example: if you buy toothpaste regularly, a company might place chewing gum right next to it, hoping you'll add it without thinking. Example: cereal companies advertise not just breakfast food, but the routine of eating cereal every morning. So it becomes automatic for families. The trick is to identify cues, like hunger in the morning. Link them to routines, eating their product, and reinforce them with rewards: sweet taste, full stomach, family bonding. The ethical question. This raises an important issue. If companies can predict and influence our habits so well, are they manipulating us? Charles Duhigg argues that while businesses use these tools to increase sales, we as consumers must be aware of how habits shape our choices. Once we understand our own habit loops, we can make conscious decisions instead of falling into traps. Key lesson of Chapter 7. Companies study and predict our habits because habits are incredibly powerful in driving behavior. If we are not aware of them, we may end up being controlled by others. But if we understand them, we can take back control. Up to this point, the book has shown us how habits work in individuals and organizations. But habits don't stop there. Habits also shape entire communities, movements, and societies. Why do social revolutions succeed? How do religions, political campaigns, or cultural shifts spread? Just like personal habits, social change follows loops of cue, routine, and reward, powered by community cravings and shared identity. This is what we'll explore in Part 3. And it begins with Chapter 8, Saddleback Church and the Montgomery Bus Boycott, How Movements Happen. Chapter 8, Saddleback Church and the Montgomery Bus Boycott, How Movements Happen. Up until now, we've explored how habits shape individuals and organizations. But in this chapter, Charles Duhigg takes us into an even bigger arena, society itself. He asks a powerful question. How do social movements, like religious revivals or civil rights revolutions, actually spread? The surprising answer: they spread through social habits. The story of Saddleback Church. Let's start in California. A pastor named Rick Warren wanted to grow a new church in a suburb called Saddleback Valley. But he faced a challenge. People in modern suburbs often live busy, isolated lives. They didn't know their neighbors well, and they weren't eager to join traditional institutions. So how could he build a thriving community? Rick Warren realized that instead of focusing on preaching alone, he needed to build small groups. He encouraged people to meet in living rooms, share meals, and study together in small circles. These groups became habits. People attended regularly, supported each other, and invited friends. Over time, Saddleback grew from a few families into one of the largest churches in America. The secret wasn't just faith. It was the social habit of gathering regularly in supportive groups. The Montgomery bus boycott. Now, let's move back in time to 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. A young woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger. She wasn't the first person to resist segregation, but her act became the spark for a massive movement. Why did Rosa Parks' action ignite something bigger, while others before her had not? The answer lies in social networks and habits. Rosa Parks wasn't a stranger. She was well connected in her community. She was a seamstress, active in local organizations, and had friendships across different social circles. When she was arrested, people she knew personally felt compelled to support her. They spread the word, and soon entire communities developed the habit of boycotting buses. Day after day, people walked to work instead of riding buses. It wasn't easy, but it became a shared routine, reinforced by peer pressure and community pride. The power of weak ties. One of Duhigg's most important insights is about weak ties, the connections we have with acquaintances rather than close friends. Close friends get us started in a movement. Weak ties spread the movement further, reaching people we wouldn't normally interact with. In Montgomery, weak ties allowed the boycott to spread beyond Rosa Parks' immediate circle, through churches, workplaces, and neighborhoods, until it became a city-wide protest. How movements grow. According to Duhigg, social movements emerge in 3 stages. They begin because of strong ties, friends supporting each other. They spread through weak ties, acquaintances passing the habit along. They endure because people adopt new habits and identities. In the civil rights movement, boycotting buses turned into a habit of resistance, which later fueled sit-ins, marches, and legal challenges. Key lesson of Chapter 8. Whether it's Saddleback Church or the Montgomery bus boycott, the pattern is the same. Movements happen when social habits take root. Habits spread person to person, through networks of strong and weak ties, and they last when they become part of people's identity. This teaches us that change is not just about ideas. It's about embedding those ideas into daily routines and social connections. With this, we're almost at the end of the book. The final chapter, Chapter 9. The Neurology of Free Will. Are we responsible for our habits? Takes us into the deepest question of all. If habits are so powerful, how much control do we really have over them? Chapter 9. The Neurology of Free Will. Are we responsible for our habits? We've seen how habits shape individuals, organizations, and even societies. But this last chapter asks a deeper, almost philosophical question. If habits are automatic, are we truly responsible for them? A man named Brian Thomas. Charles Duhigg begins with a tragic story. Brian Thomas, a man in England, killed his wife in his sleep. He suffered from a sleep disorder that caused him to act out violent dreams. He didn't realize what he was doing, and when he woke up, he was devastated. The court faced a difficult decision. Was Brian guilty? Or was he innocent because he had no conscious control? In the end, he was found not guilty because his actions were involuntary. A woman named Angie Bachman. Now compare this to another story. Angie Bachman was a woman who developed a destructive habit of gambling. Casinos gave her free trips, meals, and special treatment. Slowly, gambling became automatic. Every time she felt bored, stressed, or lonely, she returned to the casino. Eventually, she lost everything: her money, her house, and even her parents' inheritance. She tried to argue in court that it wasn't her fault. Gambling had become a habit she couldn't control. But this time, the judge said she was responsible. She had chances to stop, she ignored warnings, and she made repeated choices that built the habit. So, what's the difference? Both Brian and Angie were influenced by forces outside their full awareness. But the difference lies in choice. Brian never had a chance. His disorder forced him to act without awareness. Angie, however, had choices early on. She could have avoided the casino, sought help, or recognized the danger. She didn't, and so the court held her accountable. The science of responsibility. Neuroscience shows us that habits live in the basal ganglia, deep inside the brain. They are powerful, automatic, and hard to erase. But here's the key insight. While we can't erase a habit, we can recognize the cues and rewards that drive it. That recognition gives us the power to change the routine. This is why Duhigg calls habits a kind of neurological destiny that we can still influence. Why this matters for all of us. Think about smoking, overeating, procrastination, or even destructive corporate cultures. None of these start overnight. They are built slowly, through repeated choices. Once formed, they feel automatic, but they are not unchangeable. The real test of free will is not whether we have habits, we all do, but whether we take responsibility for shaping them consciously. The final message. Charles Duhigg ends the book with a hopeful truth. Habits can be reshaped. They are not destiny. We are responsible, not for having habits, but for choosing which ones to cultivate. If individuals can change their routines, organizations can shift their cultures, and societies can transform their futures. It all starts with understanding the habit loop, cue, routine, reward, and making small intentional changes that ripple outward. Conclusion: the power of choice. When we step back and look at everything this book has taught us, one message shines the brightest. We may not always control the habits we already have, but we always have the power to choose new ones. Our brains are built for efficiency. They automate repeated actions into habits so we can survive and save energy. This automation is not good or bad. It is simply the way the brain works. What makes the difference is which habits we allow to stay and which habits we choose to change. Small choices, big changes. Every great transformation starts small. Choosing to take a walk instead of smoking. Choosing to save a few dollars instead of spending recklessly. Choosing to pause and breathe instead of reacting in anger. Each small decision plants a seed for a new habit. Over time, these seeds grow into powerful forces that shape who we are. Organizations and societies too. This isn't just about personal life. Companies, schools, communities, even nations are shaped by the habits they repeat. A culture of safety, of respect, of excellence, or even of corruption, none of it happens by accident. It is built on repeated choices that become invisible routines. Leaders who understand this can reshape entire organizations. Movements that understand this can transform societies. The question of responsibility. The final chapter raised an important truth. We are not responsible for having habits. We all do. But we are responsible for what we do about them. We cannot say, I have no choice, it's just a habit. Because the truth is, habits can be recognized, redesigned, and replaced. The cue and the reward remain, but the routine is ours to change. That is where freedom lies. That is where responsibility lies. The power of choice. So the real power is not in the habit itself, it's in the choice to change it. We can choose the habits that make us healthier. We can choose the habits that make us more successful. We can choose the habits that bring us closer to the life we truly want. Every day, we are given countless moments where the loop begins. A cue, a craving, a chance to act. In those moments, we hold the power to decide what kind of person, what kind of organization, what kind of society we will become. Final words. Charles Duhigg leaves us with hope. Habits are not destiny. They are patterns waiting to be understood. And once we understand them, we hold the power to reshape not just our own lives, but the world around us. And it all begins with a simple but profound truth. The power of habit is real, but the greater power, the one we all share, is the power of choice.